Today we're going to continue with modesty, with SNEAS, the discussion of SNEAS. I was hoping to finish today. I don't know if we're going to do that.
Sorry,
It's
so 20 minutes.
no. It's a long topic. I'm saying in terms of what I have for the topic. So we discussed last week a little bit of how SNEAS applies to us in practical terms, how we're supposed to act in SNEAS. Now we're going to get into what that means in terms of acting with SNEAS with speech, and then finally with dress. We'll talk about dress for both men and women, and then we'll talk about why it seems that women have a special connection to this issue of SNEAS. After all this discussion of how men and women are both supposed to act and be with SNEAS, why does it seem like there's so much talk about women and SNEAS? What's the special relationship they have? So first we're going to discuss SNEAS in speech. That's, when it comes to SNEAS in speech, there's really two issues here. Number one is how we say what we say, meaning the refined way to say something versus the less refined way, the actual style in which we speak. And then the second issue deals with not speaking, about holding back from speaking, being private about certain things, and even secret about certain things. So number one, just overall introduction here. We did talk when we talked about prayer. We talked about speech and how speech is the if speech is the aspect of ourselves that distinguishes us from the animals, right? So speech is it's a way of expressing our neshama, our soul, and that's the place. The mouth is the place where we have this connection, this fusion between the spirit and the body, right? Because through the mouth, through what we say, our neshama is expressed and revealed. Okay, so therefore, it's possible to attain the highest level of perfection is through speech, because it's a sign of your superiority over animals, and it's the highest level of expressing our soul. Maharal says that he describes an analogy of a person's soul as a tree, and if a person's soul is a tree, he says, then language becomes the fruit of that tree. The fruit of your lips is language. Okay, so purity of soul is greatly related to purity of speech. All right, it's so significant that we say a person's character is both reflected and affected by the way he speaks. That's why we have so many rules and ideas connected to holiness of speech and what you're allowed to say, what you shouldn't say, lashon hara, etc. In fact, it's interesting, the language reflects this. The word for speech is dibor, and closely related to that word is davar, which means thing, essence, entity, being. So speech is very much related to or expressive of the inner being. Okay, so that's the first thing. So the model of this, this idea of SNEAS, the model of what this means in terms of SNEAS is the holy language, what we call Lashon HaKodesh. Lashon HaKodesh literally transfers into the holy language. It refers to Hebrew, not modern Hebrew, but biblical Hebrew. It is a holy language because it's the language of God. God used it to create the world. It's the language of the Torah. Okay? And Lashon Kodesh gives us an idea of SNEAS in speech. How so? It's, first of all, as I said, it's the language of God. It's like language of the angels. It's an expression of holiness. The Rambam says that Hebrew is called Lashon HaKodesh because it does not have specific words for certain bodily functions and bodily organs. It doesn't have precise terms for reproductive organs. It doesn't have precise terms for reproductive acts. We use euphemisms. Okay, so for example, the Gemara uses terms like small organ. Okay, or for intercourse, we have the term bia, which means coming together. There's euphemisms used instead of just lay it on the table. There's what it is, so euphemistic. It doesn't, by the way, mean that halacha isn't very exact and precise when it needs to be. Of course, halacha is incredibly specific when it needs to spell out specific laws regarding what you're allowed to do, what you're not allowed to do. But still, it's a circular way of speaking so that we're being SNEAS, we're being modest about the most private parts of ourselves. Okay? So it's a matter of refinement, what we call edelkeit in Yiddish. The Gemara further makes an interesting point about the tznius in the Torah, and that when it came time for Hashem to tell Noach what kind of animals to take into the teva, the Torah says, the pasuk says, take from the pure animals, min ha-behema asher tahora, from the pure animals, tahora meaning pure, and then instead of saying take from the animals which are tameh, tameh is the word for the opposite of pure, which means impure. Instead of saying that, the Torah makes a detour to say extra letters and say from the animals that are not pure. So instead of saying from the animals that are pure and the animals that are tameh, it says from the animals that are pure and the animals that are not pure. Again, a couched way of saying impure. And this, again, the Gemara comments that this is maintaining a certain level of refinement in the language itself. So here is an example from the Torah where we see what tznius means in language, to not just say it as it is, to, when it comes to certain concepts of private acts or private body functions, or even in this case, something that's not as nice, right? Impurity is not so nice. There are other places, of course, where the Torah does use the term impure, but the point is, in this place, it's coming to teach us that sometimes, don't come right out and say it. Be euphemistic about it. Okay? Now, it's interesting. I find it really fascinating because when you think about the opposite of refined speech, we know that would be foul language or obscenities. And I think that it's a fascinating thing to think about, because related to this whole idea of what we're talking about, refinement, foul language and obscenities almost always have to do with physical actions and physical body parts. Think about, all those words and those the ways of demeaning people. And that's what foul language does. It basically despiritualizes a person, right? It reduces, when you use a curse word or an obscenity, you're reducing somebody to their lowest physical components. You're saying you're no more than this physical entity, this lowest physical entity. So it's like hitting somebody. It's like, it's like trying to shock them. It's more about the shock value of the way you're saying something. It's the style of what you're saying rather than the content, right? The statement I'm making is more important. The way I'm saying it is more important than what I'm saying. Or you could say also, there's really nothing I have to say to you of value. There's no content in what I'm saying. So I'm going to shout at you, or I'm going to yell at you, or I'm going to curse at you, because the way I'm saying something is what I want you to remember about me. And again, that is when there's nothing inner, nothing of value in the content of the word. So there's no innerness. There's no inherent value of the words. It's just the shock value, the external shock value. It reminds me of what we say about comedians who work blue. Comedians who use a lot of foul language in their act, we often notice and we say, they're not funny without it. Often there's no jokes there. What's the idea? What are they trying to do? They're trying to shock us into laughing, like sort of the way sometimes you see a video on YouTube of a parent, or a sibling, scaring a baby into laughter, like boo, and the kid goes and then laughs. That's sort of what it reminds me of, when there's nothing, there's just shocking into laughter, as opposed to telling me something with a content, a content-based joke. Right. So there's nothing there. It's almost always also like, it's like, it reminds me of the joke of the preacher who's preparing his sermon, and he goes away for a minute and says, some congregant comes up to his desk, sees the preacher's prepared speech, and the text is there, and then in the corner, part of the text is underlined, and then in the margin is written, the preacher has written, "Weak point, yell louder." And there also is a similar idea where I really don't have anything of value in itself to say, so I'm going to raise the external value of what I'm saying. Okay, right? When we have something really important to say, we don't need to yell about it. The point gets across without having to yell, right? And the opposite of this, again, is content, the inner value of the word. So it also means, as I said, tznius in speech means not speaking, knowing when not to speak. All right, not saying everything which is private, like you meet people sometimes who just in the first 5 minutes they're telling you about their husband's prostate exams and this and their job, the problem finding a job and all, and it's a little bit uncomfortable sometimes. And people have a need to share, and that comes from generally not a good place when they're sharing in private things that really have a value and a value to be kept private. But in any event, it's not a comfortable thing. The Gemara actually references this. It references a woman who is a woman who talks with her husband loudly in the marketplace about private matters, loudly enough, in other words, that other people can overhear. So the Gemara remarks, this is not a tznius woman. It's not a tsanua. This is someone who is the opposite of keeping things private. And then related to that, the Gemara also mentions a woman as displaying a lack of tznius, someone who gets into conversation with just any man in the marketplace. Again, the marketplace being the typical stand-in for public, okay? So someone who just talks a lot with anybody. We're not talking about someone who gets into conversation that they need to, but someone who just has this kind of person who's just talking about everything with everybody. Okay, so those are two examples that we have of the opposite of tznius. Yeah.
Do they ever use men as an example of not speaking in a tzniustic way, or do they usually point to women? And if so, why would that be?
Right. I'm trying to think. I can't. Well, I do, yes, there is. It's a good question. It's a very valid question. I'm going to give you an example of a male in the Torah who is praised for not speaking. Yes. Okay. He is actually the person I'm referring to is Binyamin, the son of Yaakov and Rachel. I'm going to discuss that in a minute. But does the Gemara give any examples? I don't know. Mm-hmm. I would say no. And the reason to answer the second part of your question, the reason I would guess, number one, first of all, again, we do have the concept that men and women have different public, private roles, right? So men are the ones that we acknowledge are more going to be out there in the marketplace, and whether that means secular marketplace, Jewish life, public place. So they are more in the public. They are more visible. And again, it doesn't mean that we're trying to say that the Torah says that women should shut up, but there is this concept that women have to protect a measure of privacy more so than men do. And I will talk a little bit later about why that is. Why is it that women are seen as the guardians of tznius more so than men? Okay, so I'm guessing that I could ask, but I'm guessing you're not going to find some examples. But you know what? I'll look. I'm gonna.
It's sort of interesting. I wonder if women are seen as, aren't we considered the species that talks?
Yes, the Gemara says that.
I don't know. So, but I think men can also curse and be vulgar about women and body parts.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think they also, maybe I'm wrong, but in terms of themselves and their family, I think they tend to be maybe more private.
Who?
Men.
More what?
More private. Whereas, I might have, my husband gives my kids
right.
and I'm so upset.
The Gemara says,
and guys are more like,
right. The Gemara says that God gave human beings 10 measures of speech, and women received 9.
What is a measure?
In other words, it's a metaphor. Obviously, you can't, but it's a metaphoric language to describe the fact that women are more expressive. We talk more basically than men. Now, this can be understood in a good way as well as a bad way. It means we are more chatty, generally speaking, and it also means that we use speech in the way that we connect with people. We are, in our special gift that we have called Bina, insight or intuition, all of that way. We use speech to make those inner connections. Okay, so in both those ways, we have to guard ourselves and make sure that when we are making connections with others, we're doing it in the proper way. For a woman to go out in the marketplace and talk with anybody, and again, the example from the Gemara was highlighting the fact that it was with any man, in other words, every man, rather than it was an indiscriminate speech, and that's not appropriate. Okay, and again, the first example of speaking with her husband loudly enough so others can hear is an appropriate thing. There are examples in the Gemara of men not acting or being b'tznius. One example is, and I was going to get into this when I talk about clothing, but there is the retelling of a situation where a rabbi was dressed, and I mentioned this last week, I think, in a beautiful, clothing of some kind that his colleagues persuaded him wasn't appropriate because it was sheer. It was see-through. It was beautifully done, but it was not appropriate for even a man to wear such clothing. So this is the story of that, to show that it's really not only women we're talking about in terms of, again, even dressing b'tznius, appropriately b'tznius. So yeah, there is, look, when it comes to tznius, aside from this issue of women being the protectors of this trait, when it comes to practically how we're supposed to act, how we're supposed to speak, and how we're supposed to dress, there's actually very little difference when it comes to men and women. All right. It's quite possible that there aren't stories of men who are speaking in the marketplace in this way, because generally speaking, as you said, men don't. Generally speaking, they don't. Women have more of a temptation to misuse the power of speech in this way, because we're given more expressiveness, this trait of speaking. Yeah, okay. So again, it's about not speaking, privacy, not always saying it like it is. Now, connected to this, as I hinted, is the idea of keeping secrets. Our prime example of keeping secrets is Rachel, as we spoke about last week, when she kept her secret and her sister's secret, and giving her sister the secret signs that she would need in order to not be humiliated under the chuppah when Yaakov would marry her, right? So that was considered an amazing, a tremendous trait of chesed, kindness that she did for her sister, as well as tznius. Okay, we talked last week also about how that was reflected, that trait of tznius was reflected and passed down to her descendants, to Shaul, to Saul, and then to Esther, also her descendant, right? We didn't mention her son Binyamin. Here's where he comes in. So she's the paragon of tznius in speech. Her son Binyamin is also seen as inheriting this trait. So here's where we see that. Aharon, the high priest, right? Aharon, the first high priest, and then subsequent high priest, they had among their dress, among their whole get-up, all the things of the paraphernalia that they wore, was something called the choshen. It was a breastplate. The breastplate contained 12 gold settings, into which there were 12 stones, precious and semi-precious stones, that were representative of the 12 tribes, the 12 sons of Yaakov. Binyamin's stone, the one that was said to represent Binyamin, was a stone called the yashpeh, in English, jasper. Okay, I think it's a greenish stone. So the Gemara talks about why this stone was meant to represent Binyamin. The yashpeh, the Gemara says, is a contraction of the words yesh and peh, has a mouth. So there's some hint as to a trait in Binyamin that he deserved to be praised for the fact that he had a mouth. What happened? So the story is, of course, that when when Yosef's brothers sold him into slavery, Binyamin, the youngest brother, knew about it. But he did not go home and tell his father Yaakov. Binyamin wasn't involved in the sale, but he knew about it. The other brothers didn't speak, obviously, because they didn't want to implicate themselves. But Binyamin knew what happened. He could have gone home and told Yaakov, and this would have been a tremendous relief for him, right? But he didn't speak. So because he didn't speak, he was displaying a certain trait of tznius. So the question is, though, well, if he didn't speak, maybe the stone should have been called, and maybe they should have gotten some other remez, some other hint as to a stone called the ein peh, that it has no mouth. Why, if he didn't speak, is the stone called yesh peh, has a mouth? You're showing me the opposite trait. He didn't speak, but we're saying, so therefore he's represented by the yesh peh, that has a mouth, right? So what is being taught by the fact that the stone is called the yesh peh, the yash peh, that he has a mouth, that he could have, the point is that he could have spoken. In other words, he had the ability to speak, he had the desire to speak, he could have, it would have been a tremendous emotional burden lifted off of his shoulders to be able to go to his father and cry together and commiserate together, to tell his father it would have relieved his own emotional burden of knowing this fact. But he held back. He held back deliberately, and he held back of his own desire because he knew that it would cause his father too much pain. So the point is that he was able to speak and he could have spoken, but he chose not to of his own volition. Therefore, the yash peh, he has a mouth. You get it?
I don't know. It seems weird to me that was the right thing to do, rather than tell his father. I mean, his father was tortured for all those years.
That's right. That's right. His father was tortured, and in fact, he was so tortured, the nevuah, the ability to have prophecy was gone in all those years, and he was devastated. But I think the idea was that it would have been a very similar situation had he been told that Yosef was sold into slavery, and it would have just compounded the problem, because now you have to deal with your sons who did this horrible thing to your favorite son, right? It's now, it was, the decision that he made was, this is really going to be the bit. Whether or not it actually was, that's another question, right? The point is that Binyamin felt that it would compound his sorrow to know that his other sons did this act. These supposed tzaddikim, these great figures, these sons of his did it, first thought of killing him, and then finally one of them decides, let's not kill him, let's sell him. So that would have, Binyamin thought, would have compounded the problem, would have compounded his sorrow. Yosef would still have been gone. Right? He would have known he was alive, okay, but yeah, so maybe there's that. Yeah, go ahead.
Is there any talk of Binyamin having a sense of prophecy himself, knowing that he really has to let this play itself out?
That is a very good question. Trying to remember, it's quite possible. Yes. I'm not going to. I would say I'm almost 100% sure that is the case, that he had some level of knowledge and insight, if not pure prophecy, that this was the proper way of doing things. Yeah, that this was what he had to do. Not 100% sure, but yeah, okay. So, and again, we have a lot of verses from the Torah, from Proverbs, talking about the measure of guarding, the importance of guarding your mouth. It says in Proverbs, Mishlei, he who guards his mouth and tongue guards his soul from troubles. We have a lot of other references about the preciousness of our speech. From Eshes Chayil, what we sing on Friday night in praise of a woman, which we will learn in the future, it says, Piha pascha v'chachama, her mouth opens in wisdom. And the Torah of kindness is on her tongue. So a lot of the idea of speech as being something we have to really guard and really be careful about, because as I said, it is the junction of the soul and the spirit, the physical and the spiritual. So it both reveals and affects our soul when we use it correctly. So now we get to modesty and dress. This is the good part, right? Yes, go ahead.
How does bad speech affect the soul?
So it's a good question. How does bad speech affect the soul? Do you want to answer?
Yeah,
okay.
Personal experience.
Go ahead.
Well, after I read what is it called, by the Chafetz Chaim, the laws of
Guard your tongue.
guard your tongue.
Right.
Yeah, so I dropped at least by 50%. This was, many years ago. Cursing and gossiping and all of that, because I hadn't been aware of all that. And you really feel different. I feel different.
I would
I
make an
feel like
analogy.
I had dirtied myself, and all these ugly things that would come out of my mouth because I was feeling ugly, so to speak. When I dropped that stuff and I, would talk differently or not say anything, I just felt cleaner inside.
Do you know how? I'm glad you're ending in that. I wanna hop right in and add to that. When you get rid of, there are people who, I'm not one of them, but who go off sugar, white sugar completely, or they eliminate certain elements, negative elements from their physical diet, and they say they feel 10 times better, 100 times better. It's a similar kind of thing. It's harder to, it's not a physical cleanliness. It's as you said, it's a spiritual. You feel better in some way. It's not a mental cleanliness, and you just feel better in certain ways. I think there's a similar analogy to be made to ridding your diet of something that's toxic. You feel it, maybe we might feel it more strongly, in a physical way when I rid my diet of something toxic, sugar or candy or whatever it is, even alcohol, caffeine, whatever it's going to be. There's a real physical difference you feel. And in a similar way, when we put things in our mouth that are not holy things, and when we vulgarize our speech or are not careful about lashon hara, so we are, at the same time they're going out into the world, so they're reflecting what we're thinking and what we're all about. They're also entering our consciousness, our minds, our subconsciousness, and ultimately our neshama is tainted by it. It's a less tangible way, but that's how we feel about it. I'm glad you had that experience.
Yeah, it was amazing.
So that I'm not the only one saying that there is.
I'm not saying I'm perfect now. I certainly improved, but I noticed the difference.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, in the very, very rare times when I've accidentally said a curse word, which, I mean, sometimes it will happen. It will slip out. I hate to admit that on camera. but sometimes, because it's in our consciousness, unfortunately we do hear it, and sometimes some of it penetrates to our brains. And when it's happened, I feel that I've smudged myself a little bit, just so I'm gonna agree with you in terms of your experience. Okay, so now we come to dress. So I want to stress again that we're talking about both men and women in what I'm about to say. Both men and women. Both men and women are required to dress and act and speak modestly in a refined way and a dignified way. Okay? Both men and women are forbidden from dressing provocatively for the other sex. Okay? Both men and women. Men are specifically told they are not allowed to dress provocatively in order to entice the passions of women. So again, I'm stressing that when it comes to how to act, how to dress, how to speak in a tznius way, there's very little practical difference in terms of the laws between men and women. Very little. Yes, Barbara?
What if the intent is just to be comfortable? Not to entice the opposite sex. Let's say somebody maybe has broad shoulders or something, and it's uncomfortable, a man to wear a shirt buttoned up, might want it down, so there's no intent.
Right.
No bad intent, just an intent for comfort. What about that?
Right. So a person has to be mindful, both even when their intent is okay. Their intent is pure. It's a hot day. They don't want to button up completely. They have to be mindful of what they're doing, even though their intent is okay. And the same thing goes for a woman. Now, with a man, as I said, there are very few differences. The differences there are when it comes to modesty for a man are in the exact, parameters of what skin can show and what skin cannot show. And I'm going to talk about this in a few minutes. Elbow to the elbow covered for a woman, to the knee covered for a woman, to the collarbone. That's about it. For a man doesn't have those exact parameters, right? Men can wear short sleeve shirts. Men can, usually do not, but they can wear shorts in certain settings. Most for women, men do not wear shorts. You will not see an Orthodox guy in shorts unless he's in a specific, if he's playing sports on, something. But in a regular, everyday setting, you will not see Orthodox guys in shorts. But again, they don't have it. So can they open a collar? Can they open their top button? Yeah. And again, what is alluring? If the question is what is alluring for a woman, is a top button open for a man alluring? It's kind of, I would guess not. Whereas on the other hand, for a woman, there's a lot more of her body that is potentially alluring that she has to be aware of, right? So this is, by the way, also another reason, and again, I'm going to get to it a little bit later, why the laws seem to focus on women, more on women than on men, because there is more of her body that's going to be potentially arousing for a man. So, you have to be mindful. A man has to be mindful that if he's going to open up 3 buttons, maybe that's a little bit questionable. 1 button I don't think is such an issue for a man. But yeah, there has to be a mindfulness of the way he's dressing. Is it standing out? Is it bringing attention to himself, undue attention to himself? And the same thing for a woman. Is it bringing undue attention? The way I like to put it is it something that's going to distract me from conversation with you? For a man or a woman. Is it something, and am I wearing earrings? Am I wearing a color lipstick? Am I wearing a necklace? Is it something that your eye is constantly going to be drawn away from my eyes and away from what I'm saying to you, right? So that would be the parameters of attracting versus attractive. In other words, if something is, or maybe the better word would be distracting. If something is distracting me from a conversation with you, then that is something that would be beyond the parameters of tznius. I think it's a good way of putting it. Okay. So, no bright, garish colors, in other words. That would be another thing that might be distracting. You won't see loud patterns. And in general, someone who wants to, we notice when someone's wearing a loud pattern. And we call it loud for a reason. I think it's very interesting that we have the adjective loud to describe sometimes what someone's wearing, because it is yelling in a way that other clothing doesn't yell. Yeah.
May I add that maybe that's partly a context. If you're in a black hat community, sure,
yes,
colors are like
boom. Yes, and
but if you're in a secular situation and everyone's wearing plaids that year, then your loud clothing isn't
absolutely, and I will discuss that idea of what's considered appropriate in one community and what's considered inappropriate in another community is very much a part of the laws of tznius as well. Those fall into the third category of laws, which go under the heading of minhag makom, which means the tradition of a place, of a specific place. There aren't many of variations of this kind, but there are some, and that will definitely fall into that category of, if I know that in this particular community loud colors are not worn, or even colors, period. There are some communities that have taken to exclusively wearing darker colors, and that's not a tznius issue, that's a style issue, all right? But if the community standard, if the community tradition is to do certain things one way, then certainly if I'm walking into that crowd, I'm going to stand out. Okay, I'll give you another example that's really even a little bit stranger to our thinking. There are some communities in Israel, even some communities here, where wigs are not considered tznius. Wigs for married women are not considered appropriate. I have an answer to that question last week. I'm not forgetting about it. This is part, okay. So in that, in other words, there are rabbis who have come out against wigs and said they're not modest head coverings for women. In those communities, it would not be appropriate for me to wear a wig, even though in most Orthodox communities, it's absolutely fine. So there is a category of minhag makom, the community standard, that we have to think about as well. Okay, but we'll get to that soon. Okay, so refined clothes, not dirty clothes, not sloppy clothes. We don't want the shirt hanging out of the pants for a man. We don't want stains on the shirt. Clothes are called something that honors a person. So we want your clothes to reflect the honor and dignity that we believe that we deserve as being created in the image of Hashem. Question. Oh.
I guess I'm just thinking, like, clothes are also a way where we express our individuality. You have, let's say you have kids that have a school uniform. They find some way, whether it's their headband or their socks or their bracelets, to be different. Like, it's almost a natural thing that we don't want to look like cookie cutter robots.
Absolutely, and that's why we don't wear the burqa either. We're allowed to express our individuality. We're encouraged to do that.
But maybe my individuality is bold, bright colors.
Again, you have to try to find a way that balances your expressing that loud personality through your clothes versus what am I trying to do? The question is, what are you trying to do in that case? Are you trying to express who you are and have colorful clothing, which is fine? Or are you trying to say, look at me and look at my colorful clothing? That's the difference. Can I express myself and wear colors I love? Yeah. But am I wearing those clothes so that you'll notice the clothes? Or do I want to, in other words, again, is it going to distract the viewer from who I am on the inside? That's the point. Yeah, Barbara?
Well, I would wear colors. And I wear bright colors. I mean, it's just pretty bright. I wear red and pink, but I wear it because they're happy colors. I feel happy.
When I say loud, I'm not talking about bright colors.
Oh.
I have pink shirts. I don't have red, but that's just because I don't think it looks good on me. I have blue. I have colors. I'm saying, you in your mind you can see like a bright plaid as a loud pattern. You've seen clothes where you look at that person, you go, that really doesn't look right on her because it's just too.
It's like wearing her.
Whatever. Right? That's what I'm talking about. It's something that makes you say, wow, look at that. As opposed to, okay, right, what I'm saying is it's not a matter of the actual colors. It's a matter of what this person is what's being presented to me first and foremost. Am I noticing the clothes first? Am I noticing the color first before I notice her, before I hear what she's saying? Am I being distracted during conversation with this person? And again, it could be a him as well as a her, although men, again, tend to just naturally wear darker things. But am I going to be distracted from my conversation with this person because her pattern is so overwhelming that it's drowning out what she's saying?
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's what we're saying. Yeah.
I'm having trouble with this because, I mean, I hear the laws. That's,
We didn't even get to the laws yet.
non-negotiable. I mean, elbows.
I didn't even get to
collarbones,
that yet, but all right,
but
yeah.
those are non-negotiable. Now you're talking about aesthetics and what's going on internally, and I can.
No, I'm not talking about
what's-
aesthetics. I'm not at all talking about aesthetics.
Okay, well, I am, I guess. Well, I can see the laws, they're non-negotiable, and I can also see, custom to fit in, both for sneastica reasons and, other things, so I can see that. But I'm having trouble, and maybe it's me, because I think you want to look attractive, and where do you draw the line? Maybe you don't want to exactly look provocative, but you want to look stunning, or you want to look beautiful, or you want people to think, whatever. And so partly it's an expression of who you are, but you can't really separate that out from what your appearance in public, because you put these things on to express yourself. It's a creative expression. But you're not going to just wear it in your bedroom and shut the door.
Mm-hmm.
You're also going out there because you're communicating something about yourself, and you want people to see, hey, I've got good taste, I look really attractive, there's an interesting combination of colors or textures. Or,
Mm-hmm.
so maybe that's just me and my lack of spiritual development. But I'm having trouble because women want to look beautiful and attractive.
And there's nothing wrong with it. And there's nothing wrong with that. Again, there's it is such a hard thing to define because it is a very indefinable thing we're talking about. Really it is. It's a very fine line. It's again, it goes back to, and we keep repeating it, but it really, and it's a hard thing to define. Attractive versus attracting. And I think every person, I think the way you figure that out is a few things. You have to start with the basics of the law. And I think you have to, from there, go to the idea of, is this something that is going to call attention, undue attention to the clothes before, again, is it going to distract somebody from whatever it is they're doing, or is their eye going to be drawn to me in an undue way? It's a very hard way to define, what is that?
Like a speech thing, you become more sensitized to your appearance,
Mm-hmm.
and if it's going to make you feel, more physical and less like a whole person, in a way you're degrading yourself. Is that kind of what you're after?
I wouldn't say degrading. I don't know if I would use that word. Because I don't know if I would use that word. Let's put that one aside. Let's start with the basics. The basics would be not showing the skin that you're not supposed to show according to halacha. Then beyond that, not showing the shape of your body too, right? You shouldn't wear tight clothing. Garish colors would also be in those guidelines. And yeah, once you sort of internalize those parameters, maybe you do get more of a sense of what is the spirit of the law telling me to do. Edith Head was a famous costume designer in Hollywood. She said, women should wear dresses. Your dresses should be tight enough to show that you're a woman and loose enough to show that you're a lady. I love that quote. Is that a nice quote? Isn't that a nice quote? Yeah. So, and again, it's there's no, you can't, after a certain point, you can't be that specific. You just, it reminds me of, I probably was a judge who once said about pornography, I don't know how to define it, but I know when I see it. Mm-hmm. I think the same thing applies here.
When you first taught me that attractive versus attracting, and you followed it up with a comment that's so true, that we as women know the difference. Mm-hmm. You know when you are trying to look hot,
right.
Whatever.
Right, and I think that's a good way of distinguishing it. Trying to look pretty and trying to look attractive versus trying to look hot.
Right.
You know what I mean? There's a difference, and I think we do know what the difference is. When we look in the mirrors and go, whoa, or we know when we look hot versus when we look attractive. Maybe that's a good way of delineating the difference. All right, so we'll talk. Let's get a little bit more into the laws and see what. All right, we can discuss this as we go along because it's a topic that is.
Do you realize what time it is?
Yes, I do. Okay. I want to just go a little further to get the full hour in. I don't know how many minutes I'm going here, but I want to get a full hour in. Okay, so refined clothes. We're told in the Gemara also. Here's another aspect of tznius and clothes, that it's not right for a man or a woman to be overly concerned with fashion. Except for Shabbos, when it's okay to have nicer clothing, fancier clothing, etc. Okay, so what does fashion mean? So does it mean you can't wear the latest styles? No, it doesn't mean you can't wear the latest styles that everybody's wearing, but it means you shouldn't have this obsession with the latest styles. It means you shouldn't, go out and want to buy the things that are that you see in vogue that month necessarily. Reb Moshe Feinstein was asked this question once: is it okay for new immigrants to America to wear the clothing of the Americans as opposed to, I guess, European styles, which were more coming from the shtetl, might have been more Jewish looking clothing. And he said it's okay to dress in basic styles that Americans are dressing in, as long as you're not doing it to be stylish. In other words, you're dressing to look decent, dressing to look attractive. And even among the Jewish communities and Orthodox communities, we have certain, there's a trickle down theory when it comes to fashion. And the fashions of the outside world do trickle down to our communities, and we have styles that, you look in the shul, you'll see a lot of girls and women dressing in, ruffled tops. It happens to be very popular these days. There was a time when, pleated skirts were all the rage, right? So it's okay to be dressed in a certain modicum of what everyone else is wearing, but it doesn't mean that you should, be obsessed with it. It also means you shouldn't wear certain kinds of styles that are, whose purpose is shock value, like the torn jeans fad, or the mohawk hairstyle fad. Those are meant to stand out. Those are meant to look. It's what we call a fad that is meant to be a style that is shocking and drawing attention. Okay. We talked about face, hands, and mouth don't need to be covered. We talked a little bit about this before. I want to just review. The idea is that your face is one of the major ways you communicate, right? When we talk to somebody, if someone's wearing sunglasses, it bothers us when we talk to someone with sunglasses on, because we can't really communicate right? We feel something's missing from communication when we don't see someone's eyes. And that's because our eyes are expressive, and we talked about this. The eyes are expressive of the soul. So it's part of how I express myself. It's part of my uniqueness. Nobody has the same face, right? No one has the same face. Everyone has the same calf, but no one has the same face. Hands as well. We talk with our hands. It's a way of expressing ourselves. Jews especially, or maybe ethnic groups in general, express themselves with body language, their hands. Also, as I said, it reflects uniqueness. Panim, interestingly enough, panim, which is the word for face, has the same root as pnim, which means inside or deep essence. So there is this connection to one's face and one's essence. Okay. In terms of uniqueness, the hands also have uniqueness, although on the surface it doesn't seem so. Our fingerprints, right? Even what do you call it? Twins, even identical twins have different fingerprints.
Really?
Yeah. The only thing about every single human being that we're all different in is fingerprints. Our handwritings are different, so they also are expressive of ourselves. And there's also an idea that it's too inconvenient to walk around. If I have to cover my hands to my fingers, I can't do anything. I can't write. I can't work in the kitchen. I can't work anywhere with covered up to the. And then again, we mentioned this idea going back to Adam and Chava, that when Adam was first created, he had a spiritual stature that radiated out of his entire body. When he sinned, after he sinned, that stature, that spiritual stature was reduced in his body, except for his face. So his face retained that spiritual elevation that therefore doesn't need to be covered up, because remember, the point of covering up clothes, using clothes to cover up, was to re-emphasize the spiritual, de-emphasize the physical. We don't need to do that with our face, because it retains the spiritual essence that he had before he sinned. So there, we don't need, interesting. Okay, so I think we'll stop there for today.